The glass doors of Nexus AI Corporation's executive boardroom exploded inward with a deafening crash. Armed men flooded the 47th floor with military precision, their boots thundering against Italian marble. Executives froze mid-sentence, coffee cups shattering against the floor. Bodyguards instinctively formed a wall around billionaire chairman Seo Du-kyum, hands reaching for concealed weapons. Everyone expected his quiet black wife to scream, to cower, to seek shelter beneath the mahogany conference table like the other terrified employees. Instead, Alma Serwa-Mensah calmly closed her laptop, removed her thin-framed glasses, folded them neatly beside her untouched water glass. Then she looked directly at the leader of the attackers, her honey-brown eyes holding something that made him hesitate. "You're making one mistake," she said softly. "You assumed I was just a software developer." The room fell silent. Within seconds, everything changed. What happened next changed everything. But before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. 3 years earlier, Seoul had welcomed Alma Mensah with indifferent gray skies and a job offer she couldn't refuse. Nexus AI Corporation had recruited her from a small technology firm in Accra, impressed by her innovative work in machine learning algorithms. She had accepted the position for reasons that had nothing to do with career advancement. She needed to disappear. The woman who stepped off the plane at Incheon International Airport bore no resemblance to the ghost who had haunted intelligence networks across 3 continents. Gone were the tactical instincts, the encrypted communications, the midnight extractions. In their place stood a software developer with impressive credentials, a warm smile, and absolutely no intention of ever using the skills that had once made her invaluable to people who operated in shadows. Her first year at Nexus passed quietly. She wrote code. She solved problems. She ate lunch alone at her desk, practicing Korean phrases from apps on her phone. She learned to bow at the correct angle, to pour drinks for her seniors with both hands, to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed Korean corporate culture. She also learned to avoid the 47th floor. Everyone knew that Chairman Seo Du-kyum occupied the penthouse office suite, but few employees ever saw him in person. He appeared occasionally at company-wide meetings, a tall figure in impeccably tailored black suits, his dark charcoal gray eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made even senior executives nervous. Rumors circulated constantly. Some said he had connections to powerful families. Others whispered about late-night meetings with men who wore expensive watches and cold expressions. Alma heard the whispers and kept her head down. She might have continued that way indefinitely if not for the server crash. It happened on a Thursday evening in late autumn. The company's primary artificial intelligence system experienced a catastrophic failure that threatened to erase months of proprietary research. The IT department panicked. Senior engineers scrambled. Someone mentioned that a junior developer on the 12th floor had once solved a similar problem. 20 minutes later, Alma found herself in an elevator ascending toward the executive suite, summoned by a desperate department head who had exhausted all other options. The 47th floor smelled like sandalwood and money. She barely noticed. Her attention was focused entirely on the blinking servers, the corrupted data streams, the elegant puzzle that presented itself through lines of code and system logs. She lost track of time. When she finally straightened, fingers aching from hours at the keyboard, the system was stable. The data was recovered. And Seo Du-kyum was standing 3 feet behind her, watching. "How did you do that?" His voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to having questions answered immediately. Alma turned slowly, her heart rate spiking before she forced it back to normal. Up close, the chairman of Nexus AI was even more imposing than she had expected. At 6'3", he towered over her despite her own considerable height. His black hair was slicked back from a face that might have been carved from marble, beautiful and utterly cold. When his collar shifted slightly, she caught a glimpse of intricate black and gray ink extending from behind his right ear toward his collarbone. A Korean dragon surrounded by drifting smoke. The corruption pattern suggested a cascading failure originating from the backup protocols, she said quietly. Once I identified the source, reconstruction was straightforward. Straightforward. He repeated the word as if testing its weight. My senior engineer spent 6 hours failing to accomplish what you completed in 40 minutes. They were looking in the wrong place. Something flickered in those charcoal gray eyes. Interest perhaps. Or suspicion. What is your name? Alma Mensa. Junior developer, 12th floor. Not anymore. He turned and walked toward his private office. Report to Human Resources tomorrow. You've been promoted. She should have declined. Should have made excuses, cited personal obligations, done anything to avoid drawing the attention of a man whose very presence suggested dangers she had spent years trying to escape. Instead she bowed and said, "Thank you, Chairman." It was the first mistake in a series that would eventually unravel everything. The promotion placed Alma directly within CEO Dukayam's orbit. As a senior developer on the AI security team, she attended weekly briefings in the executive conference room, submitted reports that crossed his desk, found herself occasionally summoned to explain technical concepts to board members who nodded without understanding. She told herself it meant nothing. She was simply good at her job. But she noticed things. The way conversations stopped when certain men entered rooms. The bodyguards who followed the chairman everywhere, their postures suggesting military training rather than corporate security. The encrypted files that appeared in system logs before vanishing without explanation. She noticed and she said nothing. Han Woojing noticed her noticing. The chairman's head of security was a compact man with a military haircut and a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who had spent years in environments where hesitation meant death. He also watched Alma with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're very observant," he said one afternoon, falling into step beside her in the corridor. "For a software developer, observation is essential for debugging." She kept her voice neutral, her pace steady. "You learn to see patterns." "What patterns do you see here?" She stopped walking and met his eyes directly. "I see a company with excellent security protocols and a head of security who is very good at his job. Beyond that, I focus on my own work." Something shifted in his expression. Respect perhaps. Or the beginning of trust. "Good answer," he said and walked away. 3 months later she received an invitation to a private dinner at the chairman's residence. The CEO family estate occupied an entire hillside in one of Seoul's most exclusive neighborhoods. Alma's taxi passed through 3 security checkpoints before reaching the main house. A stunning blend of traditional Korean architecture and modern luxury. Paper lanterns lined the stone pathway. Koi ponds reflected the evening sky. Somewhere inside, someone was playing a geogium, the traditional stringed instrument filling the air with haunting melodies. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing an elegant emerald dress that complemented her dark brown skin without drawing excessive attention. Her long natural curls were gathered at the nape of her neck. Her only jewelry was a simple gold bracelet her father had given her on her 21st birthday. A servant led her through corridors decorated with antique screens and contemporary art. The dinner, she discovered, was not a corporate function. It was a family gathering. And she had been invited as a guest of honor. The young developer who saved our company's research. Lady Choi Eun-suk, CEO Dukayam's grandmother, studied Alma with sharp eyes that missed nothing despite her 78 years. She wore a traditional hanbok in deep burgundy, her silver hair arranged in an elegant style. "My grandson speaks highly of your abilities. The chairman is very generous with his praise." Alma bowed correctly, her movements precise. "I simply did my job." The older woman's gaze traveled slowly over Alma's face, her posture, her hands. "You bow like someone who has practiced. Your Korean is excellent. And you carry yourself like a woman who is accustomed to being underestimated." Before Alma could respond, CEO Dukayam appeared at her elbow. He had exchanged his usual black suit for a dark gray ensemble that somehow made him look even more intimidating. The sleeves of his jacket were pushed back slightly, revealing the edges of intricate tattoo work. A Korean tiger emerging from mountain mists, ancient calligraphy winding through shadow and smoke. "Grandmother, please don't interrogate my guest before she's had a chance to eat." "I'm not interrogating. I'm observing." Lady Choi smiled and the expression transformed her face entirely. "She interests me. That is rare." The dinner that followed was unlike anything Alma had experienced since arriving in Korea. The food was exquisite, course after course of traditional dishes prepared by private chefs. The conversation flowed easily, guided by Lady Choi's sharp wit and genuine curiosity about Alma's background, her family in Ghana, her father the engineering professor who had raised her to value wisdom over power. By the end of the evening, Alma realized she had revealed far more about herself than she intended. And Seo Dukhyam had revealed almost nothing at all. He walked her to her waiting taxi personally, his bodyguards maintaining a discreet distance. "My grandmother likes you," he said. "She rarely likes anyone. She's remarkable. She's also an excellent judge of character." He paused and the quality of his attention shifted slightly. "She believes you are hiding something." Alma's heart stuttered, but her expression remained calm. "Everyone hides something, Chairman. It's human nature." "Yes." His dark eyes held hers. "But not everyone hides it so skillfully." She should have been afraid. Instead she felt something far more dangerous. Interest. Their relationship evolved slowly over the following months. Dinners at the estate became regular occurrences. Lady Choi taught Alma to appreciate traditional Korean tea ceremonies while extracting stories about Ghanaian customs and cuisine. Seo Dukhyam maintained his characteristic reserve, but Alma learned to read the subtle variations in his expression. The slight softening around his eyes when something amused him, the tension in his jaw when business concerns weighed heavily. She learned other things as well. The men who visited late at night were not business associates. The encrypted files contained information that would have interested intelligence agencies worldwide. And Seo Dukhyam's influence extended far beyond the technology sector into territories governed by codes older than any she could write. She should have run. Instead she found herself drawn deeper into his world, justifying her presence with rationalizations that grew thinner by the day. He was not what people whispered. The empire he controlled operated by rules she did not fully understand but which seemed in their own way honorable. He protected those who served him. He punished betrayal with swift precision. He never lied to her even when the truth was complicated. The first time he kissed her, they were standing on the rooftop terrace of his residence, Seoul's glittering skyline spread beneath them like scattered diamonds. His hands cupped her face with surprising gentleness, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "I should not want you," he said quietly. "You represent complications I cannot afford. Then send me away." "I cannot do that either." His lips brushed hers, and Alma felt the careful walls she had constructed begin to crumble. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended Korean and Ghanaian traditions. Her father flew in from Accra, his weathered face shining with tears as he walked her down an aisle decorated with white roses and Kent cloth. Lady Choi presented her with family jewelry that had been passed down through generations. And Seo Dukhyam looked at her with an expression that for the first time held no reserve at all. "I will protect you," he vowed. "With everything I am and everything I possess." Alma smiled, letting him believe the promise was possible. She had no intention of revealing the truth. Her past belonged to a woman who no longer existed. As Mrs. Seo, she would be nothing more than a devoted wife and brilliant software developer. She maintained that fiction for 2 years. Until the morning armed men invaded the boardroom and forced her to remember who she had been. The leader of the attackers was a lean man with cold eyes and a confident smile. He moved through the terrified executives like a shark through still water, his weapon held with casual expertise. "Seo Dukhyam," he announced, his voice carrying through the silent room. "Your presence is requested elsewhere. I suggest you come quietly." The chairman's bodyguards had formed a protective wall around their employer, but they were outnumbered 3 to 1. Han Woojin stood at the front, his body coiled with barely contained violence, calculating odds that clearly did not favor survival. "You will not leave this building alive," Seo Dukhyam said calmly. "My security protocols ensure it." "Your security protocols have been disabled. Your external communications are blocked. And the reinforcements you're expecting have been delayed." The attacker's smile widened. "Jang Hyuk-jin sends his regards." At the name, Alma felt ice crystallize in her veins. Jang Hyuk-jin, CEO of Kronos Technologies, leader of the syndicate that had spent years trying to dismantle her husband's empire. She had monitored his organization quietly, using skills she had promised herself she would never employ again, tracking threats that her husband's conventional security could not detect. She knew things about Jang Hyuk-jin that would have destroyed him. She had said nothing. And now his men were pointing weapons at her husband. The decision she made in that moment was not conscious. It was instinct, rising from a part of herself she had buried years ago. She reached for her laptop and began typing. "Mrs. Seo, please step away from the electronics." One of the attackers moved toward her, his weapon raised. She ignored him. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with speed that would have shocked anyone who knew her only as a patient, methodical programmer. She was accessing systems that should have been unreachable, bypassing security protocols that should have been unbreakable, dismantling Jang Hyuk-jin's carefully constructed cyber attack with surgical precision. The building's communications flickered back to life. Security doors throughout the complex began cycling through emergency protocols. External alarms activated, broadcasting emergency signals to every law enforcement agency in Seoul. "What are you doing?" The attacker grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the keyboard. Amma moved. Years of defensive training surged through muscle memory. She deflected his grip, twisted his wrist, and swept his legs from beneath him with a movement so fluid it appeared choreographed. Before he hit the ground, she had relieved him of his weapon and disabled the firing mechanism. The room went absolutely still. She stood in the center of the chaos, her breath even, her posture centered. Her glasses lay forgotten on the conference table. Her hair had come partially loose from its pins. And for the first time since arriving in Korea, she allowed herself to be fully seen. "Tell Jang Hyuk-jin his cyber attack infrastructure has been compromised," she said to the stunned leader. "His financial records are currently being transmitted to international authorities. And the extraction team he positioned on the 34th floor has been redirected to a holding area where they will be arrested in approximately 4 minutes." She watched the color drain from his face. "Who are you?" "Someone you should not have underestimated." The next minutes dissolved into controlled chaos. Han Woo-jin recovered first, coordinating with the security forces that flooded the building. The attackers were subdued with efficiency that suggested her husband's men had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. By the time the Seoul Metropolitan Police arrived, the situation was completely contained. But the damage had been done. Seo Dukhyam had watched his wife transform from a gentle software developer into someone who disabled armed attackers with military precision and dismantled cyber warfare operations with casual expertise. He had watched her reveal capabilities that should not exist outside classified intelligence agencies. He had watched a stranger emerge from the woman he thought he knew. His dark charcoal eyes held hers across the room, and she saw something there she had never seen before. Fear. Not of her abilities, but of everything they represented. Of all the secrets she had kept. The confrontation came that night in the private study of their residence. Alma had changed into simple clothes. Dark trousers, a gray sweater. Her hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders. She looked nothing like the corporate wife who had attended board meetings and charity events. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman prepared for battle. Seo Dukhyam stood by the window, his back to her. He had removed his suit jacket, and the sleeve tattoos were fully visible. The Korean tiger emerging from mountain mists, prayer beads winding through ancient calligraphy, shadows that seemed to move with his breathing. "How long were you planning to tell me?" His voice was carefully controlled. "I was planning to never tell you." He turned slowly and the anger in his eyes made her breath catch. "I have enemies who would kill you without hesitation. I have trusted you with secrets that could destroy my family. I have given you access to my home, my grandmother, my life. And you have been hiding this from me since the beginning." "Yes. Who are you, Alma? Who did I actually marry?" She drew a slow breath, ordering her thoughts. "Before I came to Seoul, I worked for an international security task force that operated in the space between governments and the organizations they couldn't officially acknowledge. We targeted cybercriminal networks, protected critical infrastructure, exposed financial crimes that threatened global stability. Intelligence work. The kind that doesn't leave records. And you simply walked away?" Her composure cracked slightly. "I watched friends die. I watched the work we did get buried by politics and corruption. I watched myself become someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to compromise anything for the mission. So yes, I walked away. I built a new identity. I came to Seoul determined to never use those skills again. Until today. Until men pointed weapons at my husband and I had to choose between keeping my secrets and keeping him alive." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. "Did you know?" His voice dropped lower. When you accepted my dinner invitations. When you allowed my grandmother to embrace you. When you stood before our families and spoke marriage vows. Did you know who I was? What I was? Yes. And you stayed anyway. I told myself I wasn't investigating you. Wasn't using my training to understand the empire you controlled. I was simply observing. The way anyone would observe a powerful, complicated man who had entered her life. She met his eyes directly. By the time I admitted the truth to myself, I was already in love with you. Leaving had become impossible. So you lied. I protected you from a past that had nothing to do with our life together. You don't get to decide what I need protection from. The anger in his voice finally broke through his control. You don't get to make those choices for me. And you do. For me. She stepped closer, refusing to back down. How many times have you decided what I needed to know? How many dangers have you hidden behind your closed doors and late-night meetings? How many threats to our family have you handled without ever telling me they existed? That is different. It's exactly the same. We both protect. We both hide. We both make impossible choices because we believe we're keeping each other safe. Her voice softened slightly. The only difference is that my secrets became visible today. He stared at her for a long moment and she watched the anger war with something else in his expression. Hurt perhaps. Or the beginning of understanding. Who else knows? Han Woojin suspects. He suspected since the beginning, I think. Your grandmother sees more than she says, though I don't know how much she's actually deduced. And Jang Hyuk-jin? He knows now. She allowed herself to acknowledge the fear she had been suppressing. Which means I've become a target. Not just as your wife, but as someone who understands systems he cannot afford to have understood. He will come for you. Yes. Then we need to discuss how to protect you. No. She shook her head firmly. We need to discuss how to end him. Because running is no longer an option for either of us. For the first time since the confrontation began, something like respect flickered in his eyes. My wife, the software developer, he said quietly, wants to destroy a rival mafia organization. Your wife, she corrected, wants to protect her family. The methods are simply different from what you expected. The weeks that followed transformed their marriage in ways neither had anticipated. Seo Dukayam maintained his distance initially, the betrayal still fresh despite his growing understanding of why she had hidden the truth. He slept in a separate suite, spoke to her only about matters of security, treated her with the careful formality he reserved for business associates rather than the woman who shared his life. Amma gave him space. She understood the nature of his wound, the way trust, once broken, required time and evidence to rebuild. She also understood that the danger approaching would not wait for their relationship to heal. Jang Hyuk-jin launched his campaign 3 days after the boardroom attack. The first assault came through financial channels. Carefully orchestrated rumors that destabilized Nexus AI's stock price and spooked international investors. Amma traced the attacks to their source and provided her husband's legal team with evidence that silenced the immediate threat. The second assault targeted supply chains, disrupting critical components needed for the company's most profitable projects. Amma identified the compromised vendors and helped negotiate alternative arrangements that minimized damage. The third assault was more personal. Han Woojin burst into the executive conference room where Amma was reviewing security protocols. His face tight with controlled alarm. Your father, he said. He's missing. The world went silent. Amma felt herself detach, entering the cold clarity that had once allowed her to function in impossible situations. Her hands were steady as she pulled up communication networks, tracking protocols, every tool she possessed. When his neighbors in Accra reported that he didn't appear for his morning walk. His phone is disconnected. His university says he never arrived for his lecture. Jang Hyuk-jin. We believe so. She was already moving, her mind racing through contingencies. I need access to your international communication networks. The private ones. Han Woojin hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll arrange it. She found her husband in his private office, already speaking rapidly in Korean to someone on a secure line. When he saw her face, he ended the call immediately. I heard. I need to go to Ghana. You need to stay here where I can protect you. My people are already. Your people don't know my father. Don't know his patterns, his friends, the places he would go if he felt threatened. I know him. I know how he thinks. Her voice cracked slightly. He's there because of me. Because I brought danger into his life by marrying into yours. Alma. Don't. She held up a hand, fighting for composure. Don't tell me this isn't my fault. Don't tell me we'll handle it together. Tell me you'll help me bring my father home safely, and then we can discuss everything else. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but recognition. He was seeing her, perhaps for the first time, as an equal rather than someone who needed his protection. I have resources in West Africa. Contacts who can move quickly and quietly. We can coordinate from here while they search on the ground. I want to be there. I know. But Jang Hyuk-jin wants you to do exactly that. Leave my protection to chase your father. He's using Professor Mensah as bait. Seo Dukhyam stepped closer, his voice dropping. I won't let him have you. Not even if you hate me for it. I could never hate you. The words escaped before she could stop them. She watched them land, watched his carefully controlled expression flicker with something that might have been hope. Then trust me. The way I'm learning to trust you. Professor Kwame Mensah was located 48 hours later in a remote village outside Kumasi, guarded by men who clearly had not expected the response that descended upon them. Alma watched the rescue operation through satellite feeds provided by connections she had not contacted in years. Her husband stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back as if he couldn't help touching her, couldn't help providing whatever comfort physical proximity allowed. He's safe, Han Woo-jin reported, his voice crackling through the secure channel. Frightened and furious but unharmed. The team is extracting him now. Alma's knees buckled. Seo Dukhyam caught her, pulling her against his chest with an urgency that surprised them both. He's safe, he repeated, his breath warm against her hair. Your father is safe. She clung to him, all the terror and determination of the past 2 days finally releasing in a flood of shaking relief. He held her through it, his hands moving in soothing circles across her back, his presence steady and solid. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. For what? For every secret. For every lie. For believing I could protect you by keeping you in darkness. His arms tightened around her. I'm sorry too. For treating you like something fragile that needed my protection rather than a partner who deserved my trust. She pulled back enough to look at his face, finding something there she had missed during the weeks of distance. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take more time, but the willingness to try. We're terrible at this, she said. At what? Being vulnerable. Admitting we need each other. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We'll practice. Professor Mensah arrived in Seoul a week later, escorted by a security detail that would have suited visiting royalty. He embraced his daughter with tears streaming down his weathered face, then turned to his son-in-law with an expression that held no judgment. You saved my life, he said simply. Your daughter saved your life. I merely provided resources. You provided safety when she needed it. That is everything. The professor took Seo Dukhyam's hands in both of his, a gesture of blessing and acceptance. In our culture, family is not only blood. It is those who stand beside us when standing is difficult. You have proven yourself worthy of my daughter. That is enough. Lady Choi insisted on hosting the professor at the family estate, overwhelming him with traditional Korean hospitality while extracting stories about Alma's childhood that made her daughter cover her face in embarrassed affection. She built her first computer from discarded parts when she was 8 years old, Professor Mensah recalled, his eyes bright with memory. Taught herself programming from textbooks she found in university dumpsters. By 12, she was correcting her teacher's mistakes. She sounds insufferable, Lady Choi observed with delight. She was extraordinary. Always 3 steps ahead, always seeing patterns others missed. The only thing she never mastered was asking for help. His gaze found Alma across the room and she saw the gentle reprimand beneath his words. Some lessons take longer than others, she said quietly. Indeed. But you seem to be learning. Jang Hyuk-jin made his final move 6 weeks later. Alma had anticipated the attack. Had, in fact, helped orchestrate the circumstances that would make it irresistible. Working alongside Han Woo-jin and her husband's most trusted strategists, she had created the appearance of weakness, the illusion of opportunity too perfect to ignore. The confrontation took place in a warehouse on Seoul's industrial outskirts, a location chosen specifically for its isolation and controlled access points. Jang Hyuk-jin arrived with his full contingent of soldiers, confident that he was walking into a trap of his own design. He found Alma waiting for him alone. She stood in the center of the cavernous space, surrounded by the hum of servers she had configured herself. No weapons visible. No obvious protection. Just a woman in dark tactical clothing with her natural curls pulled back from her face. Mrs. Seo. Jang Hyuk-jin approached slowly, his cold silver-gray eyes assessing the situation. He was exactly as she remembered from surveillance photographs. Tall and athletic, his sharp jawline accentuated by designer clothing, a silver ring glinting on his right hand. I admit I'm surprised you came without your husband's protection. I don't need my husband's protection. No. The intelligence community disagrees. They consider you extremely dangerous. He gestured to the men surrounding the warehouse. Which is why I've taken precautions. The men positioned on the loading docks have already been neutralized. The snipers on the adjacent rooftops are currently being detained. And the backup team you stationed 2 blocks north received new orders 15 minutes ago. Orders that appeared to come from you but actually originated from the server cluster. She watched the confidence drain from his expression, replaced by the first stirrings of fear. You're lying. Check your communications. He did. And she saw the moment he realized exactly how completely he had been outmaneuvered. Everything you've built, the financial networks, the political connections, the criminal enterprises, I've spent the past 6 weeks mapping it all. Every transaction. Every bribe. Every body you thought was buried deep enough to stay hidden. Alma stepped closer, her voice quiet and absolutely steady. In approximately 3 minutes, that information will be transmitted simultaneously to international law enforcement agencies, government regulators and your competitors. Your empire will collapse before sunrise. You're bluffing. I'm not. Then what do you want? Money? Power? Revenge for your father? I want you to understand something. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough to see the silver gray of his eyes flicker with desperation. I spent years running from who I was. Pretending I could be someone gentle and simple and safe. But the woman I tried to become was never real. This is who I am. Someone who sees patterns in chaos, who dismantles systems that hurt innocent people, who protects her family by any means necessary. And your husband? Is exactly where he needs to be. As if summoned by her words, Seo Du-kyum emerged from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had long ago stopped fearing violence, his bodyguards flanking him like extensions of his own will. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe in the flickering light. Jang Hyuk-jin. His voice carried across the space, calm and utterly cold. You attempted to destroy my company. You kidnapped my wife's father. You threatened everything and everyone I hold dear. He stopped beside Alma and she felt his hand find hers in the darkness. Did you really believe there would be no consequences? This isn't over. It is. Seo Du-kyum squeezed Alma's fingers once, a gesture of partnership and trust. The evidence my wife compiled will ensure you spend decades in prison. Your organization is already being dismantled by authorities who have waited years for exactly this opportunity. And any associates who might consider revenge will learn that attacking the Seo family brings consequences far worse than they imagined. Jang Hyuk-jin's composure finally shattered. He lunged toward Alma with desperate violence. He never reached her. She moved first, deflecting his attack with the same fluid efficiency she had demonstrated in the boardroom. But this time she was not alone. Han Woo-jin materialized at her side, his military training complementing her defensive techniques. And behind them, Seo Du-kyum's soldiers moved with lethal precision, ending any possibility of escape. Within seconds it was over. Jang Hyuk-jin knelt on the concrete floor, restrained and defeated. The empire he had spent decades building crumbled around him as evidence flooded international networks. And Alma stood beside her husband, breathing hard but unbroken. You didn't need to reveal yourself, Seo Du-kyum said quietly for her ears alone. My people could have handled the final confrontation. I needed to face him. To prove, to myself as much as anyone, That the woman I used to be and the woman I've become can exist together. That I don't have to choose. And can they exist together? She looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly tender man she had married. I think so. With the right partner. The ceremony took place 6 months later, in a garden that overlooked the Seoul skyline. It was not a wedding, they had already exchanged those vows years ago. But it was a renewal, a declaration, a public acknowledgement of everything they had survived and built together. Alma wore a gown that blended Ghanaian and Korean design elements, the fabric flowing around her like water made solid. Her hair cascaded in natural curls adorned with flowers from both countries. Her honey-brown eyes shone with a peace she had not expected to find. Seo Dukhyam wore a traditional hanbok modified with subtle Western influences, the dark fabric making his tattoos visible where his collar opened. When he looked at his wife, the cold reserve that had once defined him was nowhere to be seen. Their families surrounded them. Professor Mensah stood beside Lady Choi, both of them wiping tears they pretended not to shed. Han Woojin maintained a watchful position near the entrance, but even he was smiling. I once believed, Seo Dukhyam began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, that love was a weakness. That caring for someone meant giving your enemies a target. That the safest path was one walked alone. He took Alma's hands in his and she felt the words honor and loyalty pressed against her palms. I was wrong. The world believed my wife was only a quiet software developer. They were wrong. She is the strongest person I have ever known. A woman who faced her darkest memories to protect those she loved, who tore down her walls and rebuilt herself as someone even more remarkable. And she is the only woman I will love for the rest of my life. Alma felt tears sliding down her cheeks, warm and welcome. I spent years running from myself, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I believed that the dangerous woman I had been and the peaceful woman I wanted to become could never coexist. I was wrong. With the right partner, someone who sees all of me, not just the parts one chooses to show, I've discovered that strength and gentleness, power and love, can exist together. She squeezed his hands, feeling the steady pulse of his heart through their joined fingers. You taught me that. You and your impossible family and your beautiful, terrifying world. Lady Choi stepped forward, presenting them with the traditional Korean ceremonial cup. Professor Mensah followed, draping a Kent cloth across their joined hands. And as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Alma Surwa Mensah renewed her vows to a man who had once seemed unknowable but who had proven in the end to be exactly what she needed. A partner. An equal. A love worth every sacrifice. The guests applauded. The music swelled. And somewhere in the garden Han Woojin quietly updated the security protocols to accommodate the newest permanent member of the Seo family protection detail. Because some software developers, as it turned out, brought more than coding skills to their work. And some marriages, built on secrets and silence, found their strongest foundation in truth finally spoken aloud.